Let's continue with our discussion of Discovered, Not Designed, by Sean McClure. Today is the fourth part of our interpretation. In this section, we will talk about how to understand and think about complex systems. Let me start with a word of caution. If you are highly intuitive, this section may profoundly influence how you think about problems in the future. But I also worry that you might misunderstand it, either elevating it too much or dismissing it outright, which largely depends on whether you are inclined toward holism or reductionism. Modern science is largely built on reductionism. That is, it starts from first principles and explains phenomena layer by layer upward. First physics, then chemistry explained by physics, biology explained by chemistry, psychology explained by biology, and so on. What McClure advocates in this book, by contrast, is holism. Holism approaches complex systems from a macroscopic and abstract perspective and does not concern itself with internal details. It holds that the properties of each layer of a system are emergent. Lower layers cannot explain higher layers, and first principles are of little use. Physics cannot explain chemistry. Chemistry cannot explain biology. Biology cannot explain psychology. In fact, both views have merit. It is true that no scientist can derive all of chemistry from the first principles of physics. The computation is simply too complex. And it is also true that no one can explain human consciousness starting from individual cells. But to say that chemists do not need to understand physics, or psychologists do not need to understand neuroscience, would also be wrong. McClure seems somewhat dismissive of practices like using functional fMRI scans to locate where willpower resides in the brain. But as we have discussed many times in our channel, neuroscience is extremely helpful for understanding human behavior. I agree that some psychological phenomena cannot be explained biologically, but I do not agree that all psychological phenomena are beyond the reach of neuroscience. So my position is more moderate than McClure's. I believe holism and reductionism both have their uses and should be applied together rather than treated as mutually exclusive. I hope you agree with this stance. With that attitude in place, we can safely explore the holistic way of thinking that McClure promotes. Let us first consider a philosophical question. Is the world's knowledge finite or infinite? From a reductionist perspective, knowledge is certainly infinite. Science advances every day, new discoveries constantly emerge, and the boundaries of human understanding keep expanding. But you may also have noticed something else. When we discuss social issues, and even some scientific issues, we often return to ancient wisdom. The ideas of Confucius, Mencius, Laozi, Zhuangzi, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle never seem to go out of date. Why is that? If you read Han Feizi or the Book of Lord Shang, you will find governing ideas that some modern governments still use to control society. If you read Sima Qian's Treatise on Commerce, it reads like a manifesto for free market economics. This leads some people to believe that, once you thoroughly understand the classics, you are done. There is no need to constantly chase the news. So what, exactly, is the relationship between old wisdom and new knowledge? From a holistic perspective, McClure argues that knowledge in the world is convergent. That is, all variations ultimately return to a few core patterns. The high-level configurations of complex systems tend to persist far longer than the low-level details that constitute them. For example, when we casually talk about dogs, we are referring to an abstract concept, not to a particular dog or even a particular breed. Any individual dog may die. An entire breed may go extinct. Yet the concept of dog remains. Even if 1,000 new breeds appear in the future, they are still dogs. The higher the level of abstraction of a concept, the more durable it is. From this, McClure proposes the idea of invariance as truth. Truth consists of those patterns that endure over time and hold across complex systems of both the past and the future. In this sense, the number of truths in the world may actually be limited, and knowledge converges rather than grows infinitely. What we call new knowledge is often just a re-expression of old patterns. The principles remain the same. If scientists discover a previously unknown species of fish in the deep sea, they would certainly welcome the discovery. But it would not overturn their worldview. No matter how strange the fish is, it must still solve problems of breathing, feeding, and swimming. Its physiology will not differ fundamentally from other fish. It still conforms to the high-level concept of fish. Holism focuses precisely on such abstractions and pays less attention to how a concept is implemented. The same function can be realized through many technical paths. Many animals, for example, have eyes. Their structures differ, but once you know what eyes are for, you can infer many things. My own caution here is this. In McClure's framework, it may be true that there are not that many truths, but I do not believe that the ancients discovered them all. Some truths can only be seen from a sufficiently advanced vantage point. For instance, ancient thinkers certainly did not have the concept of uncertainty in quantum mechanics. They lacked probability theory and statistics. They could not fully grasp the unpredictability of complex systems or chaos. These concepts are indispensable to modern thinking. Still, I agree that holism has great value. Truths at the level of abstraction do have universality. You should learn to see essences, draw analogies, and use invariance to respond to change. With this abstract way of thinking, when we examine a complex system, we should focus on its properties. Properties are macroscopic constraints on a system. If a property appears repeatedly across many complex systems, it qualifies as the kind of truth discussed above. For example, conservation of energy and the law of entropy increase are properties of closed physical systems. The key point is that you do not need to know the internal details. If you give me a mechanical system, as long as I know how much energy goes in and how much is lost as heat, I can determine how much work it does externally. I do not need to know the specific mechanisms of transmission, friction, or heat dissipation. The property of energy conservation allows me to make highly useful judgments. Energy conservation is not just a property, it is a truth. Biological systems also obey it. Organisms must consume energy in order to function. Accounting systems do as well. Income and expenditure must balance. There are many similar properties. Nutrient cycles in ecosystems, thermal expansion of metals, the tendency of nature to reach equilibrium through feedback loops, and so on. The common patterns of complex systems we discussed earlier. Evolution, iteration, information compression, metamechanism selection, multiple realizability, are all properties. These properties can further be distilled into a core set shared by all complex systems, including self-organization, nonlinearity, feedback loops, phase transitions, critical points, chaos or periodicity, bifurcation, and so on. The good news is that, although complex systems appear infinitely varied, their most fundamental properties are relatively few. Once you understand these properties, you can handle many problems. In this sense, complex systems are actually simple. Once you grasp a system's properties, if something goes wrong, you may not know how the problem occurred in detail, but you can often explain why it happened at the level of properties. McClure calls this properties over reasons. Take forest fire prevention as an example. If you manage a forest, how do you know when fire prevention should be strengthened? Simply consider two macroscopic properties: temperature and humidity. Hot, dry conditions make fires more likely, so you prepare accordingly. Whether a fire is caused by a cigarette butt, lightning, or fireworks is irrelevant. Similarly, if a city's economy deteriorates and many young people are unemployed, out of school, and idling in the streets, you can predict that crime rates will rise. Which individual commits a crime, or whether it is due to parenting or peer influence, does not matter at this level. The same applies to the human body. Ancient people may not have understood fat or cells, but with a basic notion of energy conservation, eat more, move less, excess energy accumulates, they could understand obesity quite accurately. Property-based judgment is essentially intuitive thinking. It relies on pattern recognition and heuristics. And intuition is often highly effective. How do you identify energy inputs and outputs in a system? How do you recognize positive and negative feedback loops? These are acts of pattern recognition and heuristic judgment, developed through experience and embodied in your neural networks. Your judgments may not be rigorous, but they are often accurate and insightful. And such insights cannot be strictly derived from reductionist logic. For this reason, McClure opposes excessive mathematization of complex systems. He specifically criticizes gamification, the practice of reducing systems to mathematical models with explicit rules, like a game. McClure argues this is flawed, because nature involves infinitely many influencing factors. In his view, mathematics should be used for logical reasoning about properties, such as calculating energy loss, but not for bottom-up reductionist computation. He even suggests that mathematics is not the underlying principle of large language models. Here I must add a clarification. Mathematical models have elegant and effective applications in social sciences, such as modeling epidemics, population growth, and wealth distribution. They may not fully explain phenomena, but they are helpful for prediction and intervention. And mathematics is a fundamental principle of the world. It makes no sense to say that a useful model is property-based while an unsuccessful one is reductionist. My bottom line is that mathematical models have limited scope, but they can sometimes capture key mechanisms. Reductionism and holism should be used together. At this point, you might immediately think of a question. Isn't traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, holistic? Yes, TCM is indeed holistic. It does not emphasize precise anatomical structures or cells. It treats the body as a black box, diagnosing and intervening through external observation. But TCM is not the method McClure advocates for studying complex systems. McClure is very clear. Both the properties you propose and the solutions you offer must withstand empirical testing. They must survive. You cannot invent properties through imagination. For example, the TCM concepts of yin-yang and the 5 elements, metal, wood, water, fire, earth, mapped onto organs and mutual generation or restriction, were not iteratively derived from experience. They were philosophical constructions created by intellectuals during the Warring States period. Later physicians, such as Zhang Zhongjing, did derive practical insights from experience. Ideally, those intuitions should have been preserved. But instead, they were forced into the yin-yang framework for aesthetic coherence, distorting the properties and turning them into mystical abstractions. This does not mean TCM is useless. Its emphasis on balance aligns well with complex systems thinking. But once that experience became mystified, it ceased to evolve. It could not progress toward more refined concepts like metabolic balance, acid-base balance, glucose-insulin balance, or microbiome symbiosis. Conversely, modern nutrition sciences shift toward regulating the body through balance, rather than treating symptoms in isolation, is an example of holism improving reductionism. From childhood onward, we are trained in reductionism. Yet we can clearly see the power of holism. Perhaps there is no alternative. Or perhaps governing a great state really should be like cooking a small fish. So long as you are sincere, grounded in reality, and avoid mysticism. That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.